Well, good morning to you, and today I'm coming to you from my office. This is my office, and just doing something a little different, mixing it up a little bit. Why not? And so today we're going to be continuing our journey through 2 Samuel, and what an amazing book and journey this has been, going through David's trials and tribulations and battling with Absalom. And we finished off the last part of 2 Samuel 16 was an amazing passage there where Ahithophel, who's this wise counselor that's been lured to go and work with Absalom, used to be one of David's trusted men. And he says, you know what's going to really just mess with David is if you sleep with all these concubines and do it openly. Like, just we'll set up a tent and you just go one in after the other. And he did it. And I mean, Ahithophel was Bathsheba's granddad, and he was still ticked about that. And so we bring that into chapter 17, and just to set the scene for what we're about to talk about. And as we get into that, just a reminder, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do that. Anthony P. Richards, you can get all the content there. And again, thanks to Dan Musselman for the beautiful music that we're listening to today and always. And subscribe to his YouTube channel too. So let's get into 2 Samuel chapter 17. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, now let me choose 12,000 men. This is just after he's done the whole concubine thing. And I will arise and I will pursue David tonight. And he wanted to act with urgency. Why? Because David had not was still west of the Jordan. In other words, he hadn't gotten very far. He's maybe only 20 miles away. And he really wanted to pounce. I will come upon him while he's weary and weak, and I will make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee, and I will strike only the king. Now, interestingly, he slip of the tongue. He's talking to Absalom, and he says, I will strike only the king. See, he knew in his heart all along that David was always going to be king. And he just couldn't help himself. Then I will bring back all the people to you, and when all return except the man who you seek, all the people will be at peace. And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. This actually was a pretty good plan, to be honest with you. It was a smart plan. It was bold and it had a very high probability of success, which is why David wanted his man, Hushai. That's why he wanted him in there. To foil any good plan that Ahithophel came up with. Then Absalom said, now call Hushai the Archite, and let us hear what he has to say too. When Hushai came to Absalom, he spoke to him saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do what he says? If not, speak up right now. And Hushai said, you know your father and his men. They're mighty men. They're enraged in their minds like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Your father is a man of war, and he will not camp with the people. So Hushai was appealing to Absalom's remembrance of who David used to be in the past, not knowing or not wanting to let him know that right now he's not feeling like that mighty warrior. So he's hopefully invigorating Absalom's fear of the past warrior David. Surely now he is hidden in some pit or some other place, and it will be when some of them are overthrown at first that whoever hears it will say there is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. Hushai's point was that it's too risky to attack David right now. Don't do it. And even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely, for Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Therefore, I advise that all Israel be gathered fully to you, from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea for the multitude. Now that's from north to south. He's trying to make, he's hyperbolizing, okay? And that you go to the battle in person. Now this is actually pretty crafty, because what he's advising, Hushai is advising, is a plan that would take time, and he wanted to do anything that would buy David time, because he knew the attack was inevitable. And then he says to him, this is the most awesome piece of cunning advice, if you like, that Hushai gives him. He says, he appeals to Absalom's vanity, because Ahithophel's plan was for Ahithophel to go and lead the army. Hushai says, no, Absalom, you should go. You're the mighty man, you should go. Knowing that Absalom wouldn't be able to help himself. And so we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls to the ground, and of him and all the men who are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we will pull it into the river until there is not one small stone found in there. So Absalom and all the men of Israel said, good advice, Hushai. The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel. For the Lord had purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel, to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom. So this is the writer here, just stating that the obvious, really. This is the first time that anybody had ever said that the advice of somebody else was better than Ahithophel. That had never happened in Ahithophel's life. And I think that the reason that it appealed to Absalom was because it appealed to his vanity. Just totally appealed to his vanity. And the Lord had purpose to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel, which is a great point here. God's always in control, okay? The throne of Israel belonged to God. He could grant or deny it at his will. Absalom had the smartest man of Israel on his side, Ahithophel, but David's prayer was mightier than Ahithophel's smarts, if you like. Let me tell you, prayer moves the hand of God. And David prayed. He said, "Oh Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." That was his prayer, and God did it. And you have to remember, there's a severe chastening and chastising of David in all this, for sure. But God didn't forsake David during all this. He was there for David during this time, and he wasn't out to destroy David, but he did want to correct him. Verse 15, then Hushai said to Zadok the priest and Abiathar the priest, Thus and so Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elder of Israel, and thus so I have advised. So now he's telling his spies. He's saying, this is what Ahithophel said. Now this is what I told them. So this is what they're going to do. So I need you to get this information to David. Okay? He's giving David a heads up. Now therefore, send quickly and tell David, do not spend this night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. So Hushai is saying, tell David, get on the other side of the Jordan, cross over. You've got to remember, when you come to Israel with me, you see the Jordan's like about 20 feet wide, okay? It's not like this mighty, massive river that people think of, okay? But it was a geographical landmark. And he's saying, make sure you get up, cross over the other side so that there's room to regroup before Absalom's attack. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed at En-Rogel, for they dared not be seen coming into the city. So a female servant would come and tell them, and they would go and tell King David. Nevertheless, a young man saw them, and he told Absalom. But both of them went away quickly and came to the man's house in Bahurim, who had a well in his court, and they went down into it. Interestingly enough, Jonathan and Ahimaaz found no difficulty getting help along the way. Why? Even though the whole nation had gone over to Absalom, not everybody had. And the reason, you know why I think the reason they didn't? Was because he had publicly disgraced David's concubines. I think that probably was something that pushed people a little bit too far. Like, you didn't need to do that. I just think that that's part of the deal. Verse 19, then the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth, spread ground grain on it, and the thing was not known. And when Absalom's servants came to the woman in the house, they said, where is Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman said, well, they've gone over to the water brook. And when they had searched, they could not find them, so they returned to Jerusalem. Now it came to pass, after they had departed, that they came up out of the well, and they went and told King David, and said to David, arise, cross over the water quickly, for thus has Ahithophel advised against you. So David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed over the Jordan. And by morning light, not one of them was left who had not gone over the Jordan. Now when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey. He arose, went into his house, to his city. He put his household in order, and then he hanged himself. And he died, and he was buried in his father's tomb. Ahithophel did not kill himself because he had hurt feelings that his counsel had been rejected. He killed himself because he was wise enough to know that under Hushai's plan was not going to work, and that he was going to be implicated in the conspiracy, and that he was going to die anyway. So what did he do? He went and put his household and he hanged himself. Now, let me talk about something very important here about suicide. Ahithophel committed suicide, and suicide is a sin because it's self-murder, and the Bible says you shall not murder. However, please listen to me carefully. Suicide should not be regarded as an unforgivable sin. Anyone who commits suicide they have given in to the lies and deceptions of the enemy. And his purpose in John 10:10 is to steal, kill, and destroy. So we can't allow people to be judged as if we sit in the seat of God. Is it a sin? Yes. Is it an unforgivable sin? I don't think so, and I don't sit in that seat, nor do you and I. And to be honest with you, I've had to do many funerals for people who have taken their own life, and I always believe in spreading a message of hope. I don't believe it's false hope. I believe that it's hope of a righteous and just God. That's all I can tell you. Verse 24. Then David went to Mahanaim, which is about 10 miles east of the Jordan. So now he's crossed over, and he's only made it about 10 miles past. Absalom crossed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. So he's close behind. And Absalom made Amasa the captain of his army instead of Joab. This Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Jithra. This gets a little complex, okay? Sometimes the Bible says things in a very complex way when they could have just said something easy. I'm just going to go with it, okay? Because it's the Bible. Whose name was Jithra. He was an Israelite who had gone into Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, the sister of Zeruiah, who was Joab's mother. This is a complicated way of saying that Amasa was Joab's cousin. You can read all that. Okay. Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. And now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim that Shobi the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the people of Ammon, Machir the son of Amiel from Lo-Debar, and Barzillai of the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beets, lentils, and parched seeds. There's a lot in this, by the way. Honey and curds, date honey, not bee honey. Sheep and cheese of the herd for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Shobi, Mashir, Barzillai. These were otherwise obscure men, but they helped David in a time of great need. And let me tell you that the friends that are true friends are the ones who help you when you are in a time of great need, whether they be fighters or they be people who provide you with food. These people were not warriors like David. They weren't part of the mighty men, but they helped David win in this crisis as much as anybody who held a sword. And I think about that, we do Alpha at our church, and we serve food. And I think about the wonderful team of people that serve food each Tuesday night. And those people are just as important as I am of actually teaching Alpha. The people who are serving the food and allowing people to be sustained so they can hear the word of God. We've all got jobs and roles to do. And what we need to do is be okay with the role that God has given us, and not have job envy or role envy. Well, I wish I could be the one with the sword. No. Shobi, Meshia, Barzillai, they didn't do that. They were just happy just to say, hey, we're bringing the food because you need food. And I love that about their heart. Let's go into chapter 18. Okay. David numbered the people who were with him, and he set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Now, this is where the military expertise of David comes out. The guy is a genius. He's a military genius. He really is. He knows that you can't win a battle unless you know how many soldiers you've got. So the first thing he does, let's do a count. Let's work out how we break it all up. Then David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. Here's Ittai again. Remember Ittai? Ittai only came under David the day before this all kind of unfolded. And here he is now leading 1/3 of David's army. okay? And he says, I will also surely go out with you myself. That's what David said. Now, why did he say that? He said that because the last time his army went out and he didn't go with them, that's when he had the whole problem with Bathsheba. He was not about to make the same mistake again, okay? But the people answered, you shall not go out. For if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now, for you are now more help to us in the city. They understood that it would be hard for David to fight against his own son. They understood that it was just not worth it. And the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and the people went out by the hundreds and by the thousands. You have to understand this verse. The king, the words, the king was not so proud as to not take the advice. He wasn't a coward. David was not a coward. He listened to the advice, okay? He was not going to be stubborn. He knew how to submit to the good advice of other people. He didn't give up his leadership. He actually practiced good leadership by listening to the counsel of other people. Don't be an insecure leader. David was secure enough to know, I'm the king, I can do whatever I want. But he was secure enough to also realize, I should probably listen to good counsel right now. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. You know, David reveals here all through this chapter that even though everything horrible that Absalom had done towards him, he was still his son. And he could never get over that. He just couldn't break that bond of the fact this was his son. Deal gently with the sake of the young man Absalom. All the people heard when the king gave the captain's orders concerning Absalom. David wanted everybody to hear it, okay? That Absalom should be captured alive and not mistreated in any way. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. This is hill country, okay? This is now not on the plains of the wilderness. This is like where there's like vines and bushes and big dense trees and all those kind of things. The people went out in battle against Israel. Can you understand that? They had to go and battle their own people. The only reason they were battling their own people was because Absalom had incredible charisma and power over them. And the people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place that day. The experienced leadership of David and his captains was probably the main reason for this incredible, this overwhelming victory. Because David had arranged that the battle would take place in terrain and in a place that was going to be favorable for him. And where the experience and courage of each individual soldier actually counted more than how many soldiers he had. It's brilliant mind. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. This phrase implies that God fought for David in very unusual ways, but he also used the natural landscape. People fell down holes that they couldn't see. They were caught. They were by vines hanging between trees. There was a lot going on in this particular part of the world where this battle was taking place. Then Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode on a mule. He rode on a mule. Not exactly, like all class like he was before when he was riding on his chariots. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. Okay, so imagine this. He's riding along on his mule. His hair and head get caught in a tree, but it's just as he's about to go over a cliff. So the poor mule, he just, he's gone. Okay, then he's there, and he's like, I can't cut my hair because then I'm going to fall down. So I'm just left here hanging, and I can't even save myself. Interestingly enough, he was noted for his good looks and his hair, and it was his good looks and his hair that caught him out in the trees of the forest. Now a certain man saw all this. So there's a guy watching all this, and he says to Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. And Joab says to him, you saw him? Why didn't you not strike him there into the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt, which was a big deal, by the way. But the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. And Joab said, I cannot linger here with you. And in other words, Joab knew that he had a job to do. It was an ugly job and he was going to do it. He thought it was the right thing to do. He took 3 spears in his hand and he thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. Now there's a lot in this verse. Let me unpack it. Joab was convinced that it was in David's best interest and Israel's best interest to show Absalom justice, not mercy. Absalom had received what he deserved. Let's not make any mistakes about that. He was a murderer, a traitor, he was a rapist. Joab knew that David was generally indulgent towards his children and he probably wasn't going to punish him. Now what we could say is that Joab was correct, but he wasn't right. That can happen because he's correct in understanding that it was better for David and Israel that Absalom was dead, but he was not right because he disobeyed the king's orders. And King David had God-appointed authority over Joab. But David's dealings with King Saul, we can see that if God wants to deal with somebody in authority, he can do it. He can take him out. We don't need to disobey unless we're commanded by Scripture. Okay? At the same time, it's kind of ironic that Absalom he's a rebel, right? And he has his life taken by the rebellious act of Joab. He got what he deserved and Joab was going to be held accountable. 1 Kings chapter 2, Joab was going to have to be accountable for what he did. No doubt about that. Wow, there's a lot in this, I tell you. Verse 15, and 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and they struck and killed him. So even after having 3 spears through the heart, he wasn't dead, and it took 10 people. You could say that that could have been, 10 young men, one for each of the concubines that he had, just disgustingly betrayed, if you like. I don't know that. I just think it's an interesting numerical coincidence. Joab wanted to make sure that Absalom's body was going to be something that could never be memorialized as an inspiration to future rebels, which is why in verse 16, Joab blew the trumpet. The people returned from pursuing Israel. Joab held back the people. They took Absalom, cast him into a large pit in the woods. They laid a very large heap of stones over him, and all of Israel fled, everyone to his tent. Okay, Joab wanted to make sure that Absalom's army was in full retreat. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. Now, that's what you'd expect from a self-centered, self-promoting man like Absalom, to make your own monument. But Joab made sure that Absalom didn't have a memorial in his death. Interestingly enough, Absalom did have 3 sons, so I guess all we can surmise from this is that by the time this happened, all those 3 sons were dead. So they must have predeceased him. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, let me run now and take the news to the king. So he wants to go and tell David how the Lord has avenged him of his enemies. And Joab said to him, you shall not take the news this day, for you shall take the news another day. But you shall take no news, because the king's son is dead. Ahimaaz wanted to take this news to David, but Joab wanted to spare Ahimaaz the burden of being the one who was going to have to be the bearer of the bad news. It wasn't that he didn't want him to find out. Joab said to the Cushite, so he picked somebody else. Joab said to the Cushite, go tell the king what you have seen. And the Cushite bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ahimaaz the son of Zadok said to Joab, but whatever happens, please let me also run after the Cushite. So in other words, Ahimaaz, he really wants to do this, okay? And Joab said, well, why will you run since you have no news? In other words, remember, I told you, you've got nothing to say. But whatever happens, he said, let me run. So he said to him, okay, run. And Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain, and he outran the Cushite. Now, David was sitting. This is very interesting, okay, this whole passage that we're about to read here. David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate to the wall, lifted his eyes and looked, and there was a man running alone. And the watchman cried out and told the king, and the king said, if he's alone, there is news in his mouth. And he came rapidly and drew near. Then the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, there is another man running alone. And the king said, he also brings news. So the watchman said, I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. In other words, one of your spies. And the king said, he is a good man, and he comes with good news. So Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, all is well. Then he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, when Joab sent the king's servant and me, your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I did not know what it was about. I'm adding my own inference there, okay? Why? Because the only thing David was concerned about was what happened to Absalom. He should have actually been way more concerned about what had happened to, for Israel as a nation than his traitor son. But at the same time, he showed that he couldn't help but see Absalom as a son first and foremost. It's a great example, I think, of the bond between a father and son, and it's a great example of the bond between God, our Father, and us. When we do things that disappoint God, when we do things we think, well, God will never forgive me. I think David's love for Absalom shows us an example of how God's love for us is never tainted by the horrible things we do. Spurgeon said this. He said, our children may plunge into the worst of sins, but they are still our children. They may scoff at our God. They may tear our heart to pieces with their wickedness. But we cannot unchild them, nor erase their image from our hearts. There's a lot in that, isn't there? He said, I saw a great tumult, but I did not know what it was about. In other words, I am a useless messenger, is what Ahimaaz was saying. He might have been a great runner, but he was a terrible messenger. The messenger, his first responsibility is to get the message across. So, the king said, turn aside, stand here. So he turned aside, he stood still, and then just as then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, there is good news, my lord and king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you. And now, he's basically going to give him the news. The king said to the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? And the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man. That was his fancy way of saying he's dead. Then the king was deeply moved, and he went up to the chamber over the gate, and he wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I have died in your place, oh, Absalom, my son. Wow. He was so deeply moved, I think, because he realized that it was all his fault. He realized that this was a result of Bathsheba. He realized that this was a result of his own indulgences, of his own passions. He realized that it's not enough just to train your children up in godliness. You've got to be godly yourself. He realized that he saw the ugly of himself in his own children, these are my observations. These are the things that we do all the time. I hate seeing the things that I don't like about myself when I see them in my children. And I'm reminded as I close of a very simple observation from Walter Scott, who wrote a poem, and he said this, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. I'm so thankful for Jesus.